Live from downtown Vancouver at the Vancouver Film School campus, it's time for EP Live. Hey, welcome to EPN. My name is Victor Lucas, and we bring you the latest in everything cool, and it is so good to be back. It's been a little bit of a break. I went down to Los Angeles. I took a look at Borderlands 3, which I can't talk about, but we'll have some information on that and a cool new interview very soon. I had some fun on that trip and saw a lot of familiar faces, and maybe one or two of them will appear on the show next week. We've got an incredible show lined up for you today. We've got Nick and Danny from Phoenix Labs in the house to talk to us about Dauntless, which has recently launched on the consoles out there. We're going to play some of that, and we're going to talk about that. I've also got this cool little box of treats that our friends at Chips Ahoy sent out, and I think that this is very cool. It's tied to a partnership that they have with Gears 5, and they sent me an email and said, we've got a little care package we'd like to send your way, and it's tied to our relationship with Gears 5, and they said we've got cookies for the September 10th launch. Like, these cookies are going to last until September 10th, which is when Gears 5 launches, and they sent us enough cookies that I can share them with the studio audience. There you go. There's cookies for you and cookies for you guys. Good catches. That's awesome. You guys can have some when you come up on stage, okay? And so that's actually kind of new. I've never been able to throw out treats to the audience before. That's a good idea. If you've got treats that you want to send us, get in touch with us. That'd be great. No cars today. I'm not Oprah. But we do have a rundown to dedicate, and this one is going out to our friend VMW Industries, who says the rundowns are the best. You knew you were going to get a rundown saying that. Let's get started with VMW's Industries Rundown. Now, the world is going to be getting the first details on a new Resident Evil game very soon. Capcom has announced that a mysterious new game in the zombie franchise will begin testing on September 20th in New York and Los Angeles. Members of the Resident Evil Ambassador program will be able to test the game at a special event in those cities, so expect the first details to be made available publicly around the same time. Capcom first hinted that a new game was on the way last week, although we still don't know if this is an all-new entry like Resident Evil 8, a remake of an existing title like the recent Resident Evil 2, or even the upcoming Switch ports of older games. Expect more details soon. Considering how well that Capcom did with Resident Evil 2, I wouldn't be surprised if they've got a whole bunch of new plans for remakes and reboots of their classic franchises. It does feel like those games were amazing in their day, but they were even, because I've been doing this for a damn long time, I remember reviewing those games and feeling like these are a little bit clunky back then. So they do feel like they are ripe for reinvention and to kind of reestablish what Resident Evil means going forward, because you and I know they took some missteps along the way, so it's almost like, let's go back, let's fix some of the problems that we had, and we'll do this again right. So for a whole new generation of players out there, these are going to be the new versions of Resident Evil. So I would be okay with that, although part of me says, look, let's get into some new things. I love what they did with Resident Evil 7. I thought that that was a terrifying VR experience, and I wouldn't mind for them to be experimenting with something brand new, especially if it's tied to the next consoles. That would be pretty rad as well, and maybe the next iterations of whatever VR and AR may be, tethered. Hopefully not tethered. Hopefully tethered is the operative word. They are not tethered, because that would be much better for those systems. But it'd be pretty cool to experience that terror in first person like we did with Resident Evil 7. Although Resident Evil 2 made a lot of people very, very happy. Would love to hear what you guys think. Let us know in the comments below or in the chat today. What do you want Capcom to make in the Resident Evil universe? Something old, new again, or something totally brand new? Now, Disney is using Marvel to help push their new streaming service, Disney+, but they're not the only studio with the same idea. Sony and Into the SpiderVerse producers Phil Lord and Chris Miller are developing an entire universe of live-action and animated Spider-Man TV shows. The project was first announced earlier this year, and now speaking with Deadline, Lord and Miller says that the new shows will be a mix of both live-action and animation. The plan is to have each show focus on a different character while all taking place within the same shared universe. They'll only only be able to use Spider-Man characters because they're the only ones owned by Sony, so don't expect to see other Marvel heroes pop in. No word yet on when the first batch of shows might hit the airwaves. I'm excited as hell for this, and I think that this partnership with Phil Lord and Chris Miller is a genius move on Sony's part. Into the Spider-Verse is arguably the best superhero movie that has been made so far. And every time I watch it, I am moved by it in different ways. I just think it's an extraordinary accomplishment. And I think that these creators are they're wonderful contributors to popular culture. You know, they have their finger on something there. They really understand how to make something resonate in a bunch of different ways, comedically, emotionally, cross-culturally. I am very excited about this, and I also believe that the Spider-Man universe is rich with lots of different ways to interpret and lots of different characters to flesh out and to kind of bring up to the fore. And you know what they are doing with this whole enterprise. Sony has basically been given a long plank to walk until their inevitable misstep, like what Fox did with the X-Men movies, and then Disney will be able to pull it all right back again, or they'll buy it back at a wholesale price and sort of wrap it all underneath the umbrella of Marvel. Or Sony will be a contributor to whatever the MCU is putting out there and help to bolster their coffers without having Disney to spend all of that money and all that stuff, because Disney still takes a huge chunk of all the action figures that they sell and all of the licensing that comes along with each one of these things being a hit. We saw that Venom was a massive success. We know that Andy Serkis is directing the next Venom film. I think that this bodes well, and I love what Sony's been doing with the recent Spider-Man movies. So, yes, they're partnered with Marvel. I think that this is going to work out just fine, and I am excited. All right, the last season of Game of Thrones was a little controversial, but that hasn't dethroned the show's creators. Game of Thrones showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss have inked a deal to develop new films and TV shows with HBO rival Netflix. The pair have been courting different networks and streaming companies ever since Game of Thrones ended, and there are reports that Netflix paid as much as $200 million to win them over. The pair have been in high demand despite the mixed reception of the final Game of Thrones season, because every network wants their own Game of Thrones caliber hit. Along with the Netflix deal, Benioff and Weiss are also developing new Star Wars movies for Disney, the first of which lands in 2022. I think that this might be a little bit of a risky play, but what else is Netflix going to do but, take some risky plays? They have to own as much of this content as possible. They've been partnered with every studio in Hollywood for a long time, and of course every studio in Hollywood is trying to launch their own streaming service right now, so they're all going to be very, very strong competitors, especially Disney, to whatever Netflix is putting out there. And so the only thing that Netflix has got up their sleeve is the ability to use their already established install base of subscribers and spend money on buying their own content. And they've got to try things that feel like bets, but a few years ago this was a sure bet. So you never know. We never knew how big Game of Thrones was going to be. HBO didn't know, and I think it's exceeded all expectations out there. And lots of people were pissed off with that final season. I wasn't. It's dismaying to read the amount of backlash that even actors that were in the show have been sort of propagating on the internet recently about how much the last episodes disappointed them. I totally get it if they disappointed you, but in total, I was very entertained and very happy with Game of Thrones. But yeah, these guys, I feel like they've got a little bit of a target on their back, and it doesn't help that they now have $200 million sort of riding over their heads, like everybody's looking like, prove it, show us what you got, let's see what you got for us. But hopefully this works out and they come up with something extraordinary. Maybe lightning will strike twice and we'll get another Game of Thrones caliber sensation, which would be rad. All right, the three big console makers are joining forces to take on loot boxes. Microsoft and Nintendo have announced, and Sony have announced new policies designed to enforce how loot boxes are sold on their platforms. Going forward, all games will be required to disclose the rarity of loot box items, which will make transactions a lot more transparent. The announcement was made earlier this week during a panel hosted by the U.S. government's Federal Trade Commission, or FTC. So although the new policy is voluntary, it could be the console maker's way to prevent the government from making even more stringent regulations down the road. Looking ahead, Rocket League developer Psyonix has announced that they're going one step further and getting rid of randomized loot boxes altogether, and will instead allow players to purchase specific items for a flat fee. It feels like the industry is making a giant move in this direction. I think loot boxes don't have much longer in the video games reality. I think that they are going to be they're going to be cut out, and it's going to mean a lot of companies are going to take a financial hit because these things have been extraordinarily successful. I think if you point at the FIFA franchise or some of the other sports games out there, you can kind of compare it and contrast it with the playing cards that have been a part of sports fandom forever. People would go in and buy a pack of cards with bubble gum and do lots of trades and stuff if they had doubles. There's an analogy there. There's a direct kind of parody there. But with lots of other items out there and lots of other games out there, it just doesn't make as much sense, and there's a lot of unhappy people. And I think that's the core of it, is that there's enough of an unhappy audience out there that the games industry itself needs to kind of turn that frown upside down. They've got to change the perspective and not make this a story, especially in the light of the ridiculous, calls to games being so violent that they're encouraging people to be mass shooters out there, sort of be a downer on all that stuff. But that's just absolutely ludicrous. But let's not give the naysayers and the doubters and the people that have no understanding of the value and the cultural relevance of video games any more power to say that these things are bad for people, And I think one of the ways that we can do that is we can take loot boxes out of the equation and remove any kind of specter of gambling associated with video games entirely. And I think the games industry really needs to do that. It's a big topic, and it's something that the entire industry is talking about. And, I think that there's some big moves ahead.